Time to talk San Francisco 49ers, your Super Bowl runner-up last year. And I'm excited to have Brady Kannon, Las Vegas golfer, joining me to talk all things San Francisco. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Ron. Maybe not as good as you, though, because I understand you have just returned from Hawaii. That must have been nice.
I'm still in the mode. I still got the shirt to be in the mode, I guess.
I
So,
saw that.
yeah, we're going with that theme for at least a couple of days until it wears off. But and I know it's the off season for the NFL, but is there really ever an off season?
Uh,
So I'm excited to talk San Francisco. You know where we last left them. It was another close loss to Pat Mahomes. Uh, you know, where are they now? Where's their mindset? What do you think are they anxious to get back on the field?
it seems like it. It feels like they have been fairly aggressive in off-season free agency. I think they are going to keep both Brandon Ayuk and Debo Samuel. It's interesting, and I think this is kind of a reoccurring theme of what will be our conversation here today. 2025, I think, will be vastly different for the 49ers than 2024. This may be their last run for a little while because they've got so many players that are in the final year of their contract. They can't keep all these stars, but boy, are they loaded right now. I really like the pairing of Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, and certainly they've had a couple of hits and misses, but I think for the most part, you talk about being aggressive and excited for this season to start. I kind of feel like they come into every year like that because they know they're one of the best. And maybe this year they know they are the best. We will see. But yeah, I think there's got to be, and probably especially when they sign Ayuk. I know the two sides are pretty darn close dollars wise. It might take a little while, but there's not a big separation in the dollars as far as one side versus the other. So I think that'll happen. And yeah, I think they want to hit the ground running and get this and pick up where they left off. Obviously, the last game they played was a loss, but an otherwise extremely successful season. And I think, obviously, ultimately, they want to win a Super Bowl, and they know as well as you and I that this is maybe their last chance for a little while. So, yeah, I imagine they're just chomping at the bit to get after it.
You mentioned John Lynch, and the good GMs in this league have one eye toward the current season and one eye down the road. And we'll get into that in the draft because it seems like he definitely had two eyes not pointed in the same direction, but they were looking forward and now. Obviously, the Chase Young, they didn't re-sign Chase Young. They tried to do, in my opinion, a little bit of what the Rams tried to do, rent him and get him over the top for the Super Bowl. And they did get close. Anything in free agency strike your fancy as something that you say, wow, that was a good move, or,
Yeah,
where were they on there?
Well, what I like, and this has kind of been a theme that they certainly employed last year, and maybe it's been a couple 3 years in a row now, but they've really put an emphasis on being deep on the defensive line. And that's exactly what they did once again this year. They bring in Malik Collins from the Texans, Jordan Elliott from the Browns, Leonard Floyd, who I think is an upgrade versus Chase Young. Chase Young just really didn't work out. Yetur Gross-Matos from the Panthers. And then they go linebacker with Devondre Campbell and Isaac Yiadom from the New Orleans Saints, a cornerback. So obviously very defensive heavy, primarily along that defensive line. And you look at the core or the crew that they have now along that defensive line: Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, Malik Collins, Leonard Floyd, Drake Jackson, Kevin Gibbons, Jordan Elliott, and Yetur Gross-Matos. I think they've improved the run stopping defense with some of these additions. I think they've improved the pass rush, primarily with Leonard Floyd to bookend Nick Bosa. So I like what and then as of late, on the other side of the ball, they bring in Logan Thomas for another tight end, an incredible pickup there. So, they just continue to load their roster with star power. And I think they did another good job in free agency this offseason.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're one of the teams that like to build from the inside on out. But one of the plays that cost their last defensive coordinator the job was it mid-season that he was fired? I'm not exactly. I think it was maybe
No,
at
it was
end
the
of
off
the
season. It was the
It
off
was the
season.
off
Yeah,
season,
right after the couple days after the Super Bowl, something like that.
That's right. There was an ill-advised blitz that everybody was pointing to as one of the reasons, and so Nick Sorensen takes over. What do you see with that? Do you think, though? Have you heard anything about how they're transitioning to Nick?
Well, in defense of Steve Wilkes, they lost their star safety, Talanoa Hufanga, right around game 11. And it was shortly thereafter that their run defense really suffered. And I think that might have been around the same time that play call that you're talking about. Wilkes is a pretty good coach. I think we've seen that in the past. But bringing him in to the 49ers system, it never really seemed to mesh. He couldn't really adjust to what they wanted. They couldn't really adjust to what he wanted to do. So I like that they've gone back to hiring from within, coming from within, like you say, with Nick Sorensen. This guy's been with the team a few years now. He was, studied under D'Amico Ryans as a defensive backs coach. He's had training on special teams. He spent, I think it was 7 or 10 years. He spent a good amount of time in the NFL as a player playing defensive back, and then also coached for the Seattle Seahawks, both special teams and defensive secondary. And we know Seattle with Pete Carroll has always had an attention towards the defensive side of the ball. And also being in Seattle for Sorensen, I think that was a benefit to where he is now because he became very familiar with the 49ers, a division opponent. So then again, he goes, with D'Amico Ryans as the defensive coordinator. I think we've seen how good that guy is, not only as a defensive coordinator, but as a head coach. And so you got to believe some of that has rubbed off on Sorensen. I like his experience. I like how he came up through the NFL on that side of the ball. I like the Niners hiring from within. I think everything is set up for success. And if you look at what the Niners have done, their last defensive coordinators that were also brought to the forefront from within, Robert Saleh, D'Amico Ryans, pretty good track record there. Maybe if there's a bet out there on Nick Sorensen to be a head coach in the next 5 years, you lay that one. But no, again, just on the surface with what you can see as far as the background and the setup coming in, I think it's going to be an improvement from last year, a better fit for the system.
Well, let's talk draft now. And up on the screen, I listed my needs. Yours may differ. I listed cornerback as their primary need for me. Offensive line, they're always trying to retool on that. I think they're trying to find the right 5 fit. Linebacker, I listed primarily because they had a devastating injury to Greenlaw in that Super Bowl, possibly cost them the Super Bowl. And I don't think he's going to be ready in August, September. Defensive tackle, which they may have already addressed, like you mentioned, in free agency. And the asterisk next to wide receiver is because at the time of the draft, I had no idea who was coming and who was going. Was Ayuk going to be signed? If they were keeping all these guys, were they really going to draft a wide receiver that early? A lot of moving parts at that position. Brady, what's your take on San Francisco's draft class?
Well, your needs that you have listed there, I think they were addressed firmly in both free agency and the draft. And like you talked about with John Lynch, I think he had an eye on both being impactful now and possibly, being supportive and impactful in the future. And I think Ricky Pearsall, checks both of those boxes. I don't know if people realize how good this guy is. He's very, very fast, faster than I think people think, has very, very good hands, is a great route runner. And key to Kyle Shanahan's offensive system, Ricky Pearsall's a very good blocker, and he can also play special teams. I think he's a great fit for the Shanahan system. And yeah, maybe they weren't quite sure what Debo and Ayuk, if they were going to be around, if they were going to be traded. But again, I think part of that Pearsall pick is planning for the future because they know probably at least one of those guys, Ayuk and Debo, won't be around here for too much longer. I talked about, 2025 being vastly different from 2024. So part of Pearsall is a future play as well. But you could argue that he was taken too high in the draft and, just going off of, his draft projection versus where they took him, you'd probably say he was taken too soon. But San Francisco did not have a pick until late in the second round. So I don't really have a problem with them going out and getting their guy, who I think could be a pleasant surprise, may surprise some people this year, and I think will have a role and have some impact on their team immediately. And then they go right after cornerback, like you point to there, with Renardo Green, led the ACC in pass breakups, 4th overall in all of FBS. He shut down Malik Neighbors in Florida State's game with LSU to begin the season last year. And I think he'll see some time when the 49ers go to nickel packages and whatnot. And I think, I mean, just going by his credentials, I think he's pretty well equipped to have some success in the league. And then after that, they go offensive line, another area that you talk about they're trying to retool. I think their offensive line is good. It's certainly not great. They have one historically good player in Trent Williams. One thing that's key about their offensive line is they return all 5 starters from last year. Yeah. So, you know, as well as anybody, Ron, I think one unit or area of the field where continuity is very important is the offensive line. So I like the fact that they return the same crew that they had last year. And then they add Dominic Puny, the left guard / left tackle from Kansas. He was one of only 3 left guard / left tackle players in the country that did not allow a sack, having at least 700 or more snaps in college. So, you know, I think, again, on paper, this guy looks like he can make an impact. And I don't think he's going to be a starter, but he'll probably be quickly planted into the rotation there for the offensive line. And I think he's a good addition. Then we go back to the defensive backfield, the safety with Malik Mustafa out of Wake Forest. Very physical, which has been a characteristic of 49er safeties for a long time. Excellent tackler. You have Hufanga, who we mentioned, you know, was injured. So I think Mustafa will probably get some reps while Hufanga continues to get back up to game speed. You know, it's a pretty good darn trio of safeties that they have in San Francisco with Mustafa, Hufanga, and Jair Brown. I like that threesome right there of good physical safeties. The next pick, Isaac Guerrero. This is kind of the typical Shanahan, you know, mid-round. Let's get a running back with a lot of upside, a lot of speed. And, you know, we'll see if the guy pans out. He certainly turned some heads in college at Louisville with that speed and toughness, a very physical back. Mason and Mitchell are free agents at the end of the year. So it could work out perfectly where they groom this guy for a season and then he becomes the first and foremost backup to Christian McCaffrey going forward. So, you know, that's another one of those Kyle Shanahan running back picks that we'll see if it turns out. And then to round out the draft, you've got Jacob Cowing, you know, a little speedster slot wide receiver guy out of Arizona. Jarrett Kingston, offensive lineman from UFC, just adding depth there. And then Tatum Bethune out of Florida State, a linebacker. Again, you know, you talked about the linebacking core of Greenlaw, Warner. They add Javondre Campbell in free agency. I believe Bethune here just trying to add some depth because while that linebacking crew looks like, you know, world beaters on paper, they are a little thin as far as depth. So I understand the move adding Bethune. I would say overall, Ron, I'd give the draft a B. I think they absolutely address the needs for now and in the future. I really like the first 4 picks. The last 4 picks, it's probably like, you know, like most draft choices, you got to give it 2 or 3 years to see if it was a hit or a miss.
Yeah, good assessment there. Obviously planning for the future at wide receiver. Cowing's a nice fit, I think, in this offense. And anytime any Shanahan, father or son, drafts a running back, I figure, oh, that guy's probably pretty good. And this particular running back, his yards per carry, phenomenal in college. So that works for me. My only concern was Green was lower rated on my board. I had him 4th, 5th round as opposed to the end of the 2nd round. So I thought they could have either doubled up or done a little bit better at cornerback. But that was really my only takeaway there.
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand. And you know the college players a lot better than I do. And I think looking at some of the players that were drafted either ahead of him or behind him, yeah, I think there's a pretty strong argument out there that there might have been some better corners. But I don't know nearly as well as Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch what they think might fit best for their system. So, I think a lot of these guys, you just have to kind of wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, if they have the right coaching staff, they can mold these guys. They lost Jimmy Ward a couple of years ago, but they had him. He was a multi-dimensional player, cornerback, safety. So maybe they can mold Green into something special as well. Before we go into the divisional and season win outlook, I don't know what the league has against the NFL when it comes to schedules, but they had worked off a -20 rest differential in some really tricky spots in 2023. And my notes this year, not so much. I mean, we got a problem here because there's so many teams with a rest differential advantage over San Francisco. I think the league just wants these premier teams and Thursdays and Sunday matchups and Monday matchups. They don't care how many times or how it affects the rest of the schedule. San Francisco is a pretty veteran team. Maybe they get through it. Best part of the schedule looks to be weeks 1 through 5. What were your takeaways, if any, when the schedule was announced for San Francisco?
Yeah, I think it looks like a pretty doable schedule. I completely agree with you that they want, these big, attractive teams in prime time. And sometimes that certainly hurts the rest advantage for one team or the other. I think rest advantage can be a real thing, maybe half the time. I don't think you want to put all your eggs in that basket and look at their rest disadvantage or advantage and either bet on or against a team. I think sometimes it definitely matters. Sometimes probably not so much. Week 1, I think the Jets, that's a great game. Robert Saleh returning home, Aaron Rodgers returning to native California, where he hasn't had much success in the past, by the way. Then after that big to-do in week 1, you go on the road to the Vikings, which could be a tough scheduling spot. And like you say, a rest disadvantage there. But I don't know about Minnesota. Do the quarterbacks really scare you? I doubt it. The tough one might be the following week with the Rams, on the road at the Rams, a division opponent there. Shanahan has certainly owned McVay in the past, but I see that being a tough one. Patriots and Cardinals at home after that. At the Seahawks, they've kind of owned the Seahawks as of late, but it could be a possible look ahead to the Chiefs and the Cowboys on deck. Now, Andy Reid typically beats you in the playoffs, but you're able to get him in the regular season like the Buffalo Bills. The Chiefs and the Cowboys, I see them splitting there. I don't know how it's going to play out, but they probably win one, lose one. Then they get their bye, which I think is positioned well if you're a 49er fan or backer mid-season there. At the Buccaneers out of the bye, should be a win there. And then another twosome here where I think they probably split. They go at Green Bay and at Buffalo. Packers with postseason revenge. I could see them winning, and then the Niners beat Buffalo or vice versa. And then they come home for the Bears. And I think that's a sneaky bad spot right there for San Francisco. Off of those two big games with Green Bay and Buffalo, you return home, you try and catch your breath. And I think by that time, Caleb Williams could kind of be getting this thing figured out. We know the Bears are loaded with offensive talent. They might be able to catch the Niners right there. Then you have the Rams at home. I think they can get that one. They go out on the road to Miami, the teacher versus the pupil there, and Shanahan versus McDaniel. And then I think the last two games are a big question mark, with the Lions returning to San Francisco, the scene of the crime of the playoff victory last year. That's very interesting. And then the Cardinals at Arizona to end the season. If you're thinking about win totals here, it could all come down to that game. And that game might not matter to San Francisco. So, yeah, there's certainly some rest situations there, some disadvantages, more disadvantages than advantages. But I think overall, there's a few spots in there that are going to be tough on San Francisco. At the end of the day, if they stay healthy, I have, the win total is 11.5 and it's juiced to the under. I lean that way. And I've seen juice anywhere from like -120 to -135. That's probably exactly my level of lean towards the under. I think it's anywhere from 10 to 12 wins this season. And I think it's much more likely to be 10 or 11. They could still win the division with 10 wins.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. Transitioning in Seattle, the Rams, They absolutely have to keep Stafford healthy, even though their backup situation is a little bit better. Divisional odds minus 195. I saw, I believe, at DraftKings or FanDuel, one of those, right in that area. Any value there? Is there more than a 2 out of 3 chance that San Francisco wins the NFC West?
Yeah, good question. And I saw even minus 220, which I wouldn't really want to lay. When you get it down under minus 200, maybe it becomes a play. I've seen the Rams in the neighborhood of 4-1, Seattle in the neighborhood of plus 750, and then the Cardinals at better than 13-1. I certainly don't think it's Seattle or Arizona. Seattle, the defense should be improved. I think it was improving as the year went on last year. It was awful to begin the season and even probably worse the year before. But now they bring in McDonald from the Ravens, who's obviously a defensive-minded coach. I think he'll probably have some success. I'm not a fan of their quarterbacks. Geno Smith a couple years ago was red hot for half a dozen games or so, but then he became Geno Smith again, and I think he's a pretty average quarterback. I don't think Drew Lock excites anybody a whole lot either. The Cardinals, I really liked what they did in the draft. I thought Jonathan Gannon did a great job as a first-year head coach. I was very impressed by him. I think they'll show improvement this year. Maybe you bet over the season win total on Arizona, but I don't think they're going to compete for the division. Are the Rams, can they win it 1 out of 4 times? Probably so. Their price is probably pretty fair. I'd probably look to play. I mean, maybe you try 2 bets: Niners to win the division and under their season win total. I kind of feel like both are very possible.
It's a very interesting angle with that, because roster-wise, San Francisco's got a really dynamic roster, but they're going to get everybody's best shot. Like you said, there's going to be a couple letdown spots, and there's a couple of games that you think that there's going to be a split here or there, and I certainly understand that. But roster-wise, they do look the best, but you don't know when you come down to those last 2 games you mentioned. Home to Detroit, Monday Night Football, and then an automatic short week against Arizona. Does that game matter? Yes or no? So it does make things pretty interesting. My final thought.
Oh
yeah,
Ron,
go ahead.
just one more thing on this divisional outlook and how it ties into win totals too. Seattle and Arizona, their win totals are like 7 or 7.5. The Rams are 8.5. And again, the Niners are already at 11.5. So, there's a 3 or, 3.5, 4 win gap there between San Francisco and everybody else. I think that kind of tells you something about their division chances too.
Yeah. Those teams are, like you mentioned with Arizona, they're definitely improved. So we just don't know whether or not in any one week San Francisco is vulnerable, but over the course of a season, they're the deserved divisional favorite. So I look at it as they have plenty of superstar talent, especially on offense. It looks like their top 3 choices, even Pooney was listed as a starter, I believe, according to Ourlads, that does the overall roster. So that will be interesting as they try to find that cohesive offensive line. You did say they returned all 5 starters, so it's going to be interesting to see how it molds there. The questions I have, linebacker and cornerback, they're going to miss Drew Greenlaw. He's not going to be 100% even when he goes in. And do they have enough at cornerback? And I just wonder, and you can speak to this as well, is there any chance that we see any other roster moves, a blockbuster move even before September?
Well, the latest one that was pretty big, we talked about it briefly, Logan Thomas, a very good tight end right there to complement George Kittle. I think that's a pretty darn big move. I mean, you look at this offensive firepower. You add Logan Thomas and Ricky Pearsall. You've got Christian McCaffrey, Brock Purdy, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle. Elijah Mitchell is an outstanding running back that not a lot of people might know about because he's a backup to McCaffrey. So, I mean, they are loaded at the skill positions on offense. Yeah, they could use something, like I talked about. They draft Bethune at linebacker. They bring in Lavondre Campbell via free agency, but still a little thin at linebacker as far as depth. And yeah, Greenlaw might take a while. I mean, Greenlaw going out was a big reason. I mean, I don't want to say it's the sole reason that they lost the Super Bowl, but I think it was a guy by the name of Owen Burks. I can't quite recall. I think that's his name. He was Greenlaw's backup. And Greenlaw was like shutting down, all the receivers, everything over the middle. And Burks was like 0 for 8 when he came into the game as far as defending passes or whatever it was. I can't remember the exact statistic, but it was like night and day versus what Greenlaw was doing. And so they do need some depth at linebacker for sure. Is there going to be a blockbuster move? They might be out of money, Ron. There's not a whole lot of money left they got to pay Ayuk, which I noted. I think they're close to doing that. I would say this is probably what you get for the most part come opening day for San Francisco. Okay.
Yeah. I was just wondering if all of a sudden Deebo Samuel might be traded or something like that.
It could happen, but I got to believe they're intent on keeping these guys because we've talked about it. 2025 ought to be vastly different. Yeah. They're not going to be able to keep all the guys. I think they have a real intent on keeping everybody this year because they know what the future holds. So I think they'll make every effort to retain everybody this season.
Makes some sense. So overall, San Francisco, the deserved favorite in the NFC West. Are they the deserved favorite in the entire NFC at this point?
I think so. Yeah, I was looking at the odds before we came on the show because I wasn't even sure if they were the second choice or the first choice for the Super Bowl. I saw at one shop they were 6-1 and the Chiefs were 5-1. It may go back and forth at other shops. Here we are in early June. I'm not really looking at Super Bowl futures just yet, but I think it's pretty clear that those teams are probably the favorites. Once again, I'm not so sure San Francisco shouldn't be favored over Kansas City. It's the last 2 Super Bowls they've had against Kansas City. They probably should have won both of them. But I talked about it with a mutual friend, Las Vegas Chris. We were kind of assessing the Super Bowl after it happened this past year. And I said, the better quarterback beat the better team. And I think that's probably happened twice to the 49ers. Patrick Mahomes, the individual, the better quarterback beat the better team. And I think that probably played out again this past year against San Francisco.
Well, San Francisco fans may not want to hear this, but clearly until the Week 18 bye for Kansas City, there was more than a field goal difference between San Francisco on the positive side versus Kansas City. Kansas City got to reboot and refreshed. San Francisco was my highest power rated regular season team. But we all know for a team like San Francisco, it's playoffs, Super Bowl, or bust these days. It's not enough just to participate for San Francisco. Brady, thanks so much for joining me and sharing your thoughts on the draft and all things San Francisco. Fascinating year for San Francisco for sure. My previews will continue in the next couple of days, going to Philadelphia and the rest of the NFC East. So again, Brady, thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining. And I'll see you again in a couple of days.